All right, well, I got 4 o'clock, so I'd like to call to order the special meeting March 30 to go through a budget workshop. We do not have a quorum, don't need to vote on anything really, it's more of an educational forum. So we are called to order.
Can I take just 12 seconds here, then we're going to turn the time to Paul so he can start going over it. A couple of requests were made of us. Number one, to kind of simplify it, make it a little bit easier. And you'll see that we started off very, fairly simple, but also behind every single one of those budget items, we have all of some significant detail behind it. So if you're looking for detail, it's there. If you're looking for simplicity, it's there. I will also ask that if there's any struggle from the audience to see the board or to see, we can turn off lights and to help if so speak up if that would be helpful to you. We can turn off the lights up front and back, whatever we'd like, so we can do that. Finally, let me get to the punchline. If we take our total budget and look at what it's at, we're going to have an increase in our budget of 4.5%. If you take that 4.5% and we separate out the cost of purchase power from everything else, every single thing else, we have a 3.8% purchase power and a 0.69 or a 0.7% increase in the other items. And that includes everything we need to do for insurance, for employee pay, for the cost of products that are going up, chemicals, etc. All of those inflationary things are inside of that. We also have an item that talks about our cost cutting and expense savings reduction summary. We have that. I believe that's also online, available for anybody to see. But that looks at every single department, what every single one of our supervisors are doing to make sure that we're saving and being as accountable for our funds as absolutely possible. So again, I look at this as the cost of purchase power. We've done a very good job. We have nationally, from both commercial and industrial, I've seen numbers of up to 12% and 8% increases in those. That's kind of a national that's being hit. We're below that. So I think we've done a yeoman's job of securing our power, at least for this coming year. So with that, I will shut up. Go, Paul.
All right. Well, thank you for being here. Thank you to everyone in the audience for being here for our budget workshop for next year's budget, fiscal year 27. We will hopefully provide a little bit of education and color on where we're at and what we're looking at for next year. We did put the things together in a little bit of a different format and tried to look at more graphical representation. And we really, like Darren said, tried to zoom out and kind of look at the 30,000-foot view. And then we're hoping that you guys, as the board, can kind of tell us where you want us to zoom in and pinpoint and focus on certain areas. And so this obviously works better as an interactive meeting. And so feel free to jump in, ask questions, stop me wherever you would like, and we'll look at anything you want to. So you kind of already know this, but the way our process works when it comes to setting the budget is myself and Darren and Matt. We meet with each of our department supervisors. We kind of drill down on year-to-date financial performance and compare that to the budget. We call that our budget to actual. We look at areas where we're over budget and why that might be. Will that trend continue going into the next year? Purchase power obviously has been significantly over budget all of this year, and so we'll kind of talk about why that was. And then we look at areas where we're also under budget. Is that an area where we can cut a little bit next year? Why did we budget that number? Why has that cost come down? And so we kind of put that together. We look back historically as well. We actually look back 8 years, but we kind of specifically focus on the last 3 and what historical expenses have been. And then we compare those two and come up with next year's budgeted amount. And so you already know this, but we have the electric, water, and sewer funds, and it's important that we treat each of those funds separately in and of themselves. As you know, electric funds can't be used for water, sewer, and vice versa. And so it's important that we silo each fund separately and make sure that revenues in each fund are being used for expenses of that fund. And so what we're going to do here is drill into the electric fund. If I can get this to work. All right, I'm going to push this button. All right. All right, so starting with operating expenses specifically in the electric fund. So that yellow bar is our next fiscal year. The orange bar would be the previous fiscal year. And so we're comparing expenses for next year to what we budgeted for last year. You can see total expenses that we project for next year is $28.4 million in the electric fund, and that is up by about $1.6 million from the previous year. Like Darren mentioned, of that $1.6 million, $1.5 million of that is purchase power. All right, and so outside of purchase power, we only have about $100,000 increase in our budget for next year. And so we've got each of these categories broken out within the electric fund. And what you can see just right off the bat is by far the lion's share of the budget in the electric fund is purchase power, about 72%. And so we are going to drill down specifically into purchase power and what we are looking at budgeting for next year. Our other major categories that we have listed, we have our labor, which makes up about 9% of that budget. You can see that that is flat in terms of the overall makeup of the budget from the previous year. Benefits, about 5%. Depreciation is the only other category that changed from the previous year. It came down just a little bit from last year. Interest, and then all other expenses is that last category. And I wanted to touch on that briefly. If you look in your budget to, it's going to be page 6. Every single general ledger account that makes up the electric fund's budget is included there on page 6. And so what that is showing us is that if you go to the bottom of page 6, we have our electric distribution department. These first 6 line items would be our purchase power cost. All right, and so those are the big numbers. That's what makes up the biggest portion of the budget. If we look throughout every single department, if you see the word labor, that would be our labor cost. All right, and so each department has its own labor expense. And then if you look on the next page in Department 90, that would be all of our fringe benefits, our Social Security, our taxes, our medical and dental premiums, our loggers contributions, all of that would make up our benefits category. Just a little bit above that, Department 30 makes up all of our depreciation, which makes up that category. And then Department 50 is that interest expense that makes up the last category. And so anything else outside of those 5 things would be what we would include in that all other expense category. And so if you look up through here, that would be everything from uniforms, fuel expense, vehicle expense, alcohol and drug testing, professional services, MIRMA insurance, all of these other items. You can see how many line items there are. That's what makes up this 8% bucket in the electric fund. Whoop. And so I kind of point that out, call that out just to say that 8% of $28.4 million is somewhere around $2.3 million of other expenses. And you could kind of say that those are the expenses that are somewhat within our control. Obviously, we have some control over purchase power, a little bit in how we purchase it, whether we hedge, whether we don't. But most of that is going to be just a pass-through cost, which we'll talk about. Labor, we have a little bit of control over that cost, but in terms of overall employees, having to pay them overtime when needed, there's very little control there. And so this 8% bucket is where we have a little bit more control over. But even within that, there's several items that are still outside of our control when you think about MIRMA insurance and all of the other things that go into that. So those are the overall categories that make up the electric fund. Before I move on to drill down closer into purchase power, are there any questions on that?
I don't have a question really, but I did today compare a lot of things from this year's budget to last year. And just what you said, I noticed a lot of decrease in administrative things, supplies, things like that. So I appreciate that effort on.
Make sure you turn on your microphone. It's recorded.
I do appreciate that effort on a lot of the reductions, and some of them are pretty hefty. So I think you're doing a good job on that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, well, let's drill down here into purchase power. So I mentioned it was going up, at least in terms of what we've budgeted, by about $1.5 million. And so total purchase power budgeted for next year is the $20,362,000. The first category that we're showing there is our Prairie State revenue. So as you know, we have a 20 megawatt share in the Prairie State coal plant in Illinois. And also, as you know, the power that's generated there at that coal plant doesn't actually physically come all the way across the lines and then into Hannibal to meet our direct energy load. The power that's generated there at the coal plant is then sold back into the marketplace at that nearest node, and then we receive the revenue from that sale based on our share. And so that's actually a credit to us. It offsets our total purchase power cost. The next category there is our MISO energy, and so MISO is our grid operator. This is by far the biggest increase that we are budgeting for next year. This current fiscal year that we're in right now, we budgeted an hourly price for our energy of about $32 a megawatt hour. What we are budgeting for next year is $42.17 a megawatt hour, which is close to a 25% increase. We've been saying it all year, but we have seen those LMPs, those hourly pricing, go up and up and up pretty much every month. So far this fiscal year, we're actually averaging about $47 a megawatt hour. But the reason for that is Winter Storm Fern, which really drove that cost up. For the entire month of January, we actually averaged $97 a megawatt hour. And so the Energy Information Administration, the EIA, they're a federal agency. They do a 2-year energy outlook in terms of looking at pricing. They actually project about a 2% decrease in pricing for next year, and then the year after that, about a 31% increase in fiscal year, I guess that would be 2028. So we know that pricing is maybe going to stay steady for a little bit and then will likely skyrocket. And then, of course, all of that was before the global war, and so that has changed things drastically as well. But long story short, we are predicting an increase there in our energy cost, and then, as you know, that is essentially a direct pass-through for us because we do not generate any of our own power here in Hannibal. The next category there is energy hedges, and so we kind of know how this works. We, as an organization, have identified 3 particular areas throughout the year that are more volatile for us, and so those would be the summer, June, July, and August, the winter, December, January, and February, and then the fall outage that Prairie State does annually. They take 1 unit offline every fall for about 35 days, and so because of that, we're losing that benefit, and so we do an energy hedge during that time as well. And so how the hedge works is that we go out for kind of bid. It's called a request for pricing for those hedges, and those third parties provide us pricing, and we have to decide whether or not we're willing to pay a premium for that pricing compared to what we could buy that same energy for on the market. And so we do that in the summer, the winter, and that fall outage. And so,
Sorry.
Yep, go
Can
ahead.
you say what month the planned outage is?
Yeah, it changes a little bit every year, but it's always around that September, October timeframe. And so we get that ahead of time from the Prairie State folks, and then we make sure we hedge based on those dates.
And the monthly budgets for Prairie State Energy looks like that reflects those months.
Right. Yeah. So we pay less to Prairie State during those months because they're not using as much, but then we kind of make up for that with that energy hedge, and then obviously the need to buy more power from the market during that time.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
So 8% is the total budget there for energy hedges. That's how we've decided to do it as an organization. And we have said that we are willing to take on, we're willing to pay that premium for more risk to protect ourselves versus the extreme weather events. And so if we were to have a week in the summer of triple-digit temperatures, we would obviously expect LMPs to skyrocket into likely triple digits as well. And so if we have a hedge in place for, say, $70 a megawatt hour, we would actually be coming ahead as opposed to what the market would be charging us for power. Any questions on our hedge process? I didn't explain that very well.
The hedge, what do you mean when you say hedge? A lot of people don't understand what you mean when you say that.
Yeah, so I have an example. I'll just give that. So let's just say during the summer, the market price for power on average is $45 a megawatt hour. And when we go out and get a hedge, we are going out to third parties and saying, how much will you charge us for 10 megawatts of power in the summer? And they're going to charge us, let's just say $70 a megawatt hour. So we're going to be paying more for that hedge during the summer for a small portion of our power. And the reason we're willing to pay more is because there will be certain times during the summer where if it's hitting triple digits, that LMP price, instead of being $45 a megawatt hour, might be $120 or $130 a megawatt hour. Or even with Winter Storm Fern, we saw $600 a megawatt hour. Well, when that happens, now we're actually coming ahead because we're only paying $70 for that hedge that we had in place. And so as an organization, we've made the decision that we're not going to hedge all of our power because we recognize that in that 3-month period, we're likely going to pay less when we buy market power. However, we want to have some protection in place in case we have an extremely, hot summer, or we have several of those events where those LMPs are much higher than we would have expected them to be. And so there's a balance there that we have to weigh in how much we're willing to pay for that insurance, but also recognizing that in the long run, the market is still going to be cheaper. You're welcome. Yes.
So when you were talking about getting a credit from Prairie States for the energy that we're allowed, and then we go around and buy it from people on the MISO, what's the difference in pricing? Are we making a profit on that, or is that close, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So for this fiscal year right now, we're averaging about $70 a megawatt hour in what we pay for Prairie State in total. For everything else outside of Prairie State, we're paying about $83, $84 a megawatt hour. And so just based on that alone, it's Prairie State for us is cheaper. And then outside of that, we also get capacity credit for Prairie State that really we don't even factor in because how that works is because we have a 20 megawatt share. When we go to buy capacity, we have to buy enough capacity for our entire load. Hannibal's load is about 55 megawatts at the max. And so because we have 20 megawatts of Prairie State, instead of having to go out and purchase 55 megawatts of capacity, we only have to purchase about 35 megawatts of capacity.
So our credit that we get is larger than what we're paying when we turn around and buy it?
It is, well, it's not...
Not always.
Not always, but I guess one way to look at it too is if you look at percentage of budget, if we added these two together, it would be 55% of the budget, and then we would take out the 24% that we get back. No, that's not a good way to explain it. But I think the better way to explain it is that if we were to not have Prairie State and we were to have to buy all of that energy and capacity off of the market instead, we would pay around $84 a megawatt hour. Whereas instead, we're paying for Prairie State at about $70 a megawatt hour.
But you said we sell it and we get credit for it, so it's not actually coming to town.
Right.
We're selling that power at 70 and then we're buying it at 84, or that's not how that works?
No,
Sorry, it
Go ahead.
fluctuates. So as your market's going up and down, if we're able to get the price here, then MISO actually is Prairie State themselves. They're the ones that help market that. And then we end up we sell this to another party, we can pick it up over here cheaper. That differential is what we're getting. And so that's what happens, that differential. It almost helps us with that volatility. Anything that goes real crazy high, we're able to sell it and make a little that helps offset that.
So you get to pick when you sell?
We do not pick. It is handled by the market. So it's market driven. So this is if you look at that very first line where we've got the -24 and the -19, those are dollars coming back in. So that's expressed all that we are anticipating that we will get this coming year. And like I said, we've gone back 8 years. We've looked at the last 3 years very carefully. So we have an estimate of where that's going to hit this year. But that's what, it's only a portion of it.
So if
It's
we-
only a portion of it.
If we could dumb it down, is it profit or loss?
It's profit. So everything above that line is is cost. Anything below the zero, that's a profit. You would call that. That's against that.
So we're making profit off of our investment at first.
A portion of it. We still have the cost that we have in the cost of the generating facility. So we're still paying this much, but we're getting a benefit of this much. So it is not taking care of our entire portfolio cost of power, but it's a definite benefit.
What's that 5% projected increase revenue dollars wise, Paul? What does that equate to?
oh, right
Like
here.
on the first line, yeah, your 5%
Yeah,
budget versus this 27 versus 26.
Yeah, we're budgeting right under 5 million, 4.95 million for next fiscal year. The previous fiscal year, I think we were 3.9 million. So this is about $1 million that we are anticipating extra next year. And that's, like Darren said, that's just because LMPs are higher. And so we're paying more here in energy, but we're getting more offset as well, just because the overall market price is higher. Yeah. Yeah, and back before capacity went haywire, 2 to 3 years ago, Prairie State was really close, and whether or not it was making us a profit, whether or not it was a little bit more expensive for us. But now that capacity has went as crazy as it has, it's extremely big benefit to have Prairie State just because of that 20 megawatts of credit for capacity.
It's one of those things when we bought it, there were a lot of skeptics. Oh my goodness, what was it, 55-cent power? But as time goes on and that 55 cent stays flat and inflation takes everything up, that becomes more and more and more valuable. So it has served us very well.
So the 20 megawatts, that's all that we can purchase from Prairie State. Is that correct? Right,
Yes, yeah.
obviously.
Yeah, and I guess I should mention, we didn't purchase that directly through Prairie State. That is through MUJMUC or MPUA, which is our joint action agency in Missouri. And so we're not necessarily the only Missouri utility that owns ownership stake in Prairie State.
It's the MPUA pool, we're a part of that. We're part owner, and that's our 20 megawatts of the 2,000 megawatt generator. So,
It's like timeshare.
all right,
A little bit.
let's keep going.
All right, let's keep going. Capacity, I just mentioned that. That has been kind of the most volatile portion of our budget over the last 3 years in several ways. And so we're happy to report that we are 100% hedged for all of our capacity next year. And so when it comes to that auction that clears once a year, that we have been hit pretty hard from in the past, we have zero exposure to that auction this year. We actually have excess, and so we have 3 solar projects that we have contracted with, all here in Missouri, that are providing us that capacity, and actually more than we need. And so when we have more than we need, we're able to sell that ahead of the auction, and then we have a portion of that that we are holding on to as a cushion, just in case our final requirement is higher than what we initially thought it was going to be. And so once the auction clears, we're able to sell that excess at whatever auction clearing price that is. And then this portion here, these capacity hedges, represents those 3 solar projects that we purchased, as well as 1 additional contract from a third party for the winter. 6% here is about $880,000 for capacity next year. This current year, we're going to spend about $1.3 million, but if you go back 2 years ago, you'll recall that we spent about $4.6 million, and then the year before that was $2.5 million. The year before that was $3.4 million, and so we've spent a lot of time in this area trying to make sure that we hedge ourselves and limit that exposure as best we can.
Paul, when does that auction close? It's April, isn't it?
Yes, April 28th is when we'll find out that clearing price. I mentioned that we get to sell that excess into that auction. We budgeted very conservatively on those auction prices. MISO, more than ever, has been very tight-lipped on where that's going to clear, which is why we've budgeted conservatively. And so if prices were to skyrocket again, then we would have more benefit in selling that back, because we would make the return on that. If prices were to clear very low, which is very unlikely, then we wouldn't make quite as much from that. But
We are not speculating, because what happens is we wanted to make sure we have capacity that we're looking at getting all the way back in 28 and 29. We have the project, the Northeast Power Generation Project. We needed to make sure that we had capacity out that 5 years, as we had the only capacity available that came from solar. And solar, what happens is that you can buy this year at, call it 20. Well, the next year it's going to only be 17, and the next year it's only going to be 14. The next year it's only going to be 10. And in order for us to hit that 5th year, we had to buy extra here. We're not speculating. Even if we didn't get anything back on the other, that's still going to be held at that 6%. It's a good, solid, conservative way to make sure that we are covered with capacity, not just this year, but the years to come. And so, no speculation. We're not gambling on anything. This is absolutely the most conservative way to make sure not just this year, but the next 3 years that we're covered, because we had to get the only capacity that was out there was solar. And all of your renewables, when you start buying capacity off of renewables, it is a degrading capacity availability. And so we had to look out at those future years to make sure we hit that mark, so that there was no exposure out there. Because again, everything from the EIA to MISO to FERC, everything is saying that the volatility in the market is going to maintain at least for the next 10 years.
all right, the next category that we have budgeted is our transmission. Wherever that electron, that energy is generated, it has to get here. It has to come across those lines, and so there's a transportation cost. What we have seen with overall demand going up due to everything, AI, data centers, electric vehicles, is congestion has went up as well. And the easiest way to think about congestion is just like a traffic jam. When you have all this demand and not a whole lot of ways to get it through certain avenues to certain places, it gets congested. And there's obviously a cost to that, especially in those volatile times of the year. And so we budgeted just about $2 million in this current year, and we're going to pay about $2.4 million when it's all said and done. And that's another area where we don't see that stopping anytime soon. And so this next year's budget is about $2.5 million for transmission. Then the last two items go together. There are that 20 megawatt share that we have in Prairie State that isn't free. The capacity portion is the fixed costs of that plant. So that would be their debt service, all of their overhead, their labor. That portion is the largest portion. And then energy is pretty much the same way that we pay for energy. They have to pay for variable costs, the cost of coal for running the plant, and those types of things. And so that's kind of a smaller portion. So about $1.5 million increase. By far, that is between energy and transmission. And then capacity is worth noting that it's come down next year. And then we expect to make a little bit more in Prairie State credit. Any questions on purchase power before we move on to revenues?
Paul, I'm seeing an estimate of Prairie State credits all year of 4.9 million.
Yes.
You compare that to our total overall revenue, and it looks like Prairie State's saving us 15.8% on our total overall costs, which I think is pretty good.
Yeah. Yep. If there was one way that it always works out the best for us, it's if LMP pricing in Illinois is for some reason higher than it is here, which does happen from time to time. It's kind of rare, but yeah, it does pay back. And like Darren said, whenever we do have those emergencies, those volatile times of the year, we really want to make sure Prairie State is up and running, because we might be paying more on our end, but we're also making a credit on the Prairie State end.
Great.
All right, well, we will move on to revenues for the electric fund next year. This current budget that we're proposing does not have a rate increase in the electric fund. No cheers. Okay, we'll move on. I've got a breakout here between each of our customer classes, residential, commercial, industrial. You can see that it's overall pretty consistent with the previous year. Obviously, the increase in revenues for next fiscal year compared to fiscal year 26 is because of the rate increases that we did do last year with the 6% in October and then the 7% in March. And so we've got that built in there for the estimate for next year. In terms of our overall kilowatt hour sales, we've actually seen a little bit of an increase now for the second year in a row. Don't know exactly why that is, but we've had some additions between General Mills, Jones Poultry right here across the street that have added to our load. Also, we think that just overall, some of the electrification with some of these new homes being a little bit more electric intensive is also probably finally not only flattening that curve, but actually kind of showing us an increase, because our customer count has been pretty consistent, if not down, maybe slightly. But like I said, usage has finally plateaued and started increasing just a little bit. You can see here, I also included the transfer fee as we would expect. It's right about 5% of our overall revenue, because we do pay 5.5% of every customer's bill to the city for that transfer fee. And then the other category would be just like our miscellaneous revenues when we have poles get hit or when we have to go install new services, new poles, things like that. Miscellaneous types of revenues that would go in there. Our interest income on all of our investments would be included in that bucket. But any questions on revenues? We're going to drill down even one step further into the residential side after this. One thing I did forget to mention is that when it comes to expenses and budgeting for energy for next year, we don't assume that we're going to have a winter storm Fern or a winter storm Uri every year. Those are typically rare, once every 5-year types of events. And so I mentioned that our LMP has been higher this year. And the reason we don't do that is because we budget for normal. And then when we do have those types of events, that's exactly why we have the emergency reserve fund to be able to cover and shoulder those events, to be able to pay for them, and then we then have to replenish that reserve for the next time. Now, if we're having those types of events every year, then that begs the question that we do need to start budgeting a little bit higher for those types of emergency events.
When was, not besides this year, when did we have another one that put us over budget?
Was it 21?
The biggest one was Uri. In February of 2021, we had Winter Storm Elliott in December of 22. That was right around Christmas, and so the impact was quite a bit smaller. But yeah, they kind of say Fern was the worst since Uri 5 years ago. And really in the summer, we haven't had anything, major.
Why'd you say that?
Yeah, knock on wood.
Yeah. Yes, Mike.
But so you have the emergency fund, at the end of the year, where does that go? Because I know you have a new budget. What do you do with that emergency fund?
Yes, yeah, hold on to that thought and we'll get to it.
Okay.
Yep. That's a great question. All right, next category is just taking this category residential here, about $12 million of revenue, and drilling down on where that revenue comes from within that rate class. And you can see here, close to $10 million comes from the usage charge, about $2.5 million comes from the customer charge, and then about 5% comes from the transfer fee. A very similar breakout to the year before. But the reason I wanted to show this is that you can see by far more revenue comes from that usage charge. And the reason for that is because the idea of the usage charge is to recover our variable costs. And because variable costs are so much higher in the electric fund with purchase power, that is why we recover so much more revenue from that usage charge. The customer charge is designed to recover more of your overhead costs, costs that exist whether or not we sell a single kilowatt hour of power or not. Things like labor, fixed costs for running our billing and all of the systems, just all of those overhead costs. What you'll see later on when we get into the water fund is that those overhead costs are much higher. We have much more consistent variable costs, but much higher overhead costs, and so we have to recover more of that from the customer charge. All right, any other questions in the electric fund before we go on to water? And we will touch on the end kind of what we're looking at in terms of that reserve fund at the end of next fiscal year and the impacts that this budget has on that reserve fund.
This really is an important slide because we get beat up often that, that if I don't use anything, I still have to pay this. That fixed cost, we can't go out just because you didn't use water, we need to fire an employee. We still have employees, we still have trucks, we still have all of those fixed costs in place, whether they use 100 gallons of water or zero, use 1,000 kilowatts or zero. That still has to be in place. All the wires, all the transformers, everything has to be on that pole. we have to be ready to serve them in spite of the amount that they use. And so we hear some pushback in the community because of that, but that, if you look at that, we really are, Paul is very careful to make sure that customer charge is appropriate, fair, and meeting that requirement.
The problem is customer charge doesn't describe what it is at all.
Yeah.
It needs about a paragraph description of what it really is.
Gotcha. I've heard it called a ready-to-serve charge, because you have to be ready to serve. I've heard it called a meter charge. I've heard it called a customer. There's a lot of different words for it. Fixed cost, but yeah, we'll work on a paragraph. We'll give that to
All the
Erica and
transformers,
make
the
sure that she
wires,
can explain that.
poles,
Yeah.
People,
Because I've heard people
The
say,
land
so I have to pay,
leases.
it's like pulling up at the gas station and having to pay $20 before
Just
you ever pump gas.
correct.
Yeah,
Yep,
so,
yep. But that's what it is, and it's carefully figured and carefully monitored. Okay.
All right, we will move on to the water fund. I attempted to do somewhat of a similar breakout for operating expenses. Obviously, like I mentioned, the variable costs in water aren't near as high like we have in purchase power. And so when we look at our chemical costs, we are seeing pretty hefty increases in our chemical costs. And so it's worth noting that we're able to actually reduce that cost for next year for a couple of reasons. We are budgeting about between 3 and 5% increase in our chemical costs, but we obviously are no longer feeding fluoride. We have a couple other chemicals that we are pulling back on and have identified ways that we can pull back on that. At the same time, we've found other chemicals that we're needing to run more of. And so that process constantly changes. And so that's why we meet with the water treatment folks and we discuss through all of that. And, hey, we need to be running more of this chemical. And hey, we can reduce this budget because we're not needing to run quite as much. And so all of that, to be said, is that we have a pretty flat budget for chemicals next year. Our labor in the water fund is the biggest portion. You can see about a 2% increase for that category. And just while I mention it, our overall wages budgeted for next fiscal year is up by about 3.2%. And that's organization-wide between electric, water, and sewer. The biggest portion of that is we have a 4% wage increase across the board. The union recently passed their contract on January 1st, and for each year, it has a built-in 4% wage increase in it. And then next year's budget is one employee fewer than this current year, and that is a lineman that we will not have next year. And so that's why we have the 3.2% increase in wages for next year. All right, and then we have our other categories, the same as the electric fund in there for the water fund. Overall expenses is about $6.6 million, which is down just about $30,000 from this current year. Any questions there before we go on to revenues? All right, we do have a 3% rate adjustment in the water fund on October 1st. If you will recall, UFS had set a rate track for us in the water fund that called for 3% rate increases every year. Fiscal year 27, which we're budgeting here, was the last year of those rate increases, but you'll remember that we didn't do any rate increase at all last fiscal year 25. So going forward, we're projecting $8.1 million of revenue in the water fund. That's actually very close to what UFS was projecting as well. And so we're doing pretty good in terms of revenues in the water fund, but we will likely have UFS reassess that fund for us this next year to determine where we're at.
What is the, that 3%, what's that to residential. What's that impact?
Yeah, it's about
on it?
$1.51 for the average residential customer. So the increase we're projecting here in revenue is about 2%, and that is because that increase again is going into effect on October 1st. So we're not quite getting a full 12 months of that increase. All right. And then again, drilling down into the residential rate class, you can see we actually make more of our revenue from the customer charge than the usage charge in the water fund. And again, that is because, like I mentioned, that overhead in the water fund is so much higher. And not only is the overhead higher, but we have 2 bonds outstanding in the water fund. And those represent fixed costs to us that we have to pay for as debt service. And so again, we have that need to recover more of that from the customer charge.
I noticed from last year to this year, the debt service charge is lower, but that would be because we've already paid on some of it, right?
That's right. Yep. Typically each year, your principal will be a little bit less, and then obviously your overall bond is less, so you're paying less in interest.
I also wondered about the meter readings. Last year, the cost was $45,000, and this year it's almost cut in half to $22,000. What's made that big of a difference?
Yes.
Which is great.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. So last year's budget, we had 2 employees in the meter department, and next year we will just have 1 employee in the meter department.
And what, I think I noticed that on the electric too. I should have asked then. Is that also due to not having an employee?
Yep,
We're
that's
down an
it.
employee?
That's
Okay.
one retirement that we'll have here in May, I believe. 1 lineman. Yep.
And you'll see some of so that meter reader, we charge 50% of that to let me get this right, 50% to electric, 25 and 25. And so that, we have several things, the cost of the CSRs, et cetera. 50% is charged to electric, 25 to water, 25 to sewer. That's how it's allocated. And so
Okay.
you'll see some of that. You'll see those relationships.
Yep, we have 15 departments total, and 7 of those departments are shared departments where we do that exact allocation.
One more question. I don't know. Do you want me to ask these line item questions
Yep,
now?
keep going, sure.
I noticed on the water distribution, which I was really happy about because I ask about that a lot, that there was also a decrease from 947,000 to 871. Is that due to some of the things we're doing to find the water loss, or no?
A little bit. One big thing that we're doing since Quentin took over is we are capitalizing all of our water main replacement. And so before, whenever we would go out and do a water main replacement, we would expense it. And so that 880 line, which is line 93 here, was substantially higher. Actually, it might have even been this line 88, maintenance of distribution and collection. Whereas now we're capitalizing it, and so we're putting it into the system as an asset and then depreciating it little by little every year for the next 40 years. And so instead of all of that expense hitting next year's budget, we can spread that expense over 40 years, an itty-bitty amount at a time. And so that has saved us a lot of money in doing that. That would be one reason. I was thinking there was one other.
Yeah, there was one other. I saw it too. Should grab my glasses.
Yeah, those are by far the 2 biggest. That's probably what it was. 658 is $160,000. I think that was closer to $200,000 the year before.
Yeah, it was
And
210.
210,000, and then materials and supplies is $75,000 for next year, and it was higher as well,
Yeah, it was 150.
150. So yeah, we cut that one in half. Yep, and so yeah, that's a big reason for that.
Okay. And then 11,000 for the fluoride, that's good too. So the water has had a lot of reduction.
Yep, right.
The one, especially when it comes to fixed cost, is the GAC. That is going to, we've got the contract for the replacement of all of the carbon in there. That consistently goes up every single year. And so that's a big amount, but we have to keep up with it.
And we are contracted for those GAC exchanges through 2028, and they're right about 3% every year. So it makes it nice for budgeting purposes because we know exactly what it is.
What are we at now? About 122,000 a change out?
$113,600 a change out, and then next year it'll be $116,800, I think, something
Okay.
like that.
I see under fringe benefits for last year, it was, I just wondered how you come up with this. It was 400,000, I think. I should have worn my glasses. And I think this year we have 299,000. How does that difference happen? Like, how do you budget for that?
You're talking about row 127, medical and dental benefits. So last year's original budget included the board contributing 75% of the employee's premium, and the original budget included the amount that we had projected for MCHCP premiums before we knew the actual amount. So when we would have done this budget workshop, it would have had that amount. Sometime before we finalized the budget, we had a more accurate number of what we were going to pay for premiums, and so that brought our budgeted amount down.
Okay.
And then in addition to that, we budgeted for the board contributing 50% of the employee's premium. And then when the union negotiated this most recent contract, they left it at the 75%.
Okay, so the 490, or the 400,000 was 50%, and the 299 represents the 75%. Okay.
Yeah, but in that logic that you're using, you would expect that the number would be lower, because if the board is contributing less of an amount, then the expense that we would be recording is lower. And I'm telling you the reason why it was higher last year is because we were just using an estimate for MCHCP premiums.
Okay.
And then when we got that actual number in, it was substantially lower than what we had originally budgeted. Yeah.
Yeah, because I thought, how would you budget that? Because you don't really know. Like,
Right, and even for this number here, 298,000, it is, we know what we're going to pay for this next 6 months through December pretty closely, but then January 1st, we don't know what our premiums are going to be. We've done our best to try to find out and get any information we can. Some have said within MCHCP that could be a double-digit increase in premiums, and I believe that's what the city is considering as well, and so that's kind of what we've planned for those last 6 months of the fiscal year. All right, any other questions in water? All right, when we talk about the water and sewer funds, really we've seen a lot of consistency between expenses really and definitely revenues. And so it does make it easier to budget for, fortunately. And so with the sewer fund, we have seen a pretty steady decline in sales, but overall it's been relatively steady. So the same breakout here for the sewer fund, you can basically see the same as water. Chemicals are pretty close to what they were the year before. Small increases in labor and benefits based on those increases, and then no other major changes in the sewer fund. Total expenses we are budgeting is about $5.4 million compared to $5.2 million the year before. We don't have any anticipated staffing changes in the sewer fund. All right, and then with revenues, we don't have any proposed rate increases in the sewer fund. I mentioned consistency. Revenues are within about $12,000 of each other. So far, year to date, that our budget to actual has reflected exactly that. Revenues have been extremely consistent. And then if we look on through here with the breakout of our residential revenues, you can see we have substantially less coming from the customer charge. And as you can imagine, fixed costs in the sewer fund are much lower than in the water fund. Not only are our treatment costs a little bit lower, but we don't have all of that meter infrastructure that we put in is more being borne by the water fund. And so we also only have one outstanding bond in the sewer fund, and it's quite a bit lower than the water fund. So with having less fixed cost, we recover more of that revenue from the usage charge. All right, anything we want to drill down or drill in on with the sewer fund?
What does non-cash and other expenses, what's that covered? I meant to ask that, well, all the,
Right, let's look at that. That is
I know
department.
it's down for the sewer. I don't remember if it was, I think it's been down for all of them.
Department 30. So we've talked about this before, but it is, I was seeing if I could zoom in, I guess not. So that represents our depreciation. And so with the reason we call it a non-cash benefit is because with depreciation, if we buy an asset in this fiscal year, and so if we buy a new vac truck in the sewer fund for $500,000, we're paying cash for it for $500,000 in fiscal year 2027. But then over the next 10 years, we can depreciate it a little bit each year. And so the expense is what's reflected here in depreciation expense. This represents all of these assets that are in our system, our sewer assets that were purchased at a prior date, but the depreciation is being recorded every year on them. And so because that cash is already gone, we've already paid for them, we have to actually add this back to our cash reserve. Because yes, it's an expense on our books, but we've already paid the cash for it. So that's why it's a non-cash benefit.
And then now you got to clean this up. And so in 10 years, when that asset, that vac truck is completely used up and broken down and we're going to get rid of it, we should have money in that reserve to take for that 5-year capital plan that we're going to be able to purchase it at that time.
Okay.
And so that way it's self-sustaining. We don't have to go in and have a great big rate increase or something because we need to replace that asset. So that depreciation, that amortization, that helps us to maintain a nice, steady.
That's why you've got your net income and then you add back the depreciation and that's where you get, okay.
That's
Less
exactly
your capital
right.
projects, okay.
Yep. Well, all of our revenues are coming in. All of our expenses are going out next fiscal year except for depreciation because that cash already went out in a previous year. So we have to add that back here.
Right.
Yep.
And then your next line down, less capital projects. Each one of those lines has that capital projects, and that's coming from our 5-year capital plan. We've gone through that in great detail previously, but that's where, when you look at that capital expenditure, that's coming from that reserve, and that's where you see the ultimate less the debt principal and your cash contribution for the year.
Okay. All right, so we mentioned we won't have any action at this meeting. Got a whole nother 20 days or so to look at this before we ask for approval in April. The overall summary, though, I wanted to talk about real quick. Like Darren mentioned, our overall expenses are up by about $1.8 million right here, but of that amount, 1.5 million is purchase power. And so outside of purchase power, the increase in our budgeted expenses is about 0.69%. And that includes just the one rate increase in the water fund. Debt coverage ratios projected. Actually, let's do the cash reserves first. And so that was a perfect example, Kelly, of all of our revenues less our expenses give us our overall net income, which we would then be able to add that to our reserve, but we have to factor in depreciation because we've already paid that cash in a previous year. We have to then factor in capital projects, which are not expenses, they're capital spending. So that was the 5-year capital plan. And then we also have to factor in our debt principal because it is not an expense either. It is it's a below the line expense. And so it also subtracts from our net income. And so if we factor all of that in, we would project an addition to the cash reserve fund and the electric fund of $806,000, and then reductions in both the water and sewer funds of about $717,000 in the water fund and about $1.2 million reduction in the sewer fund. And the reason for that is because we have significantly more capital projects planned in each of those funds. So that gives us an overall debt coverage ratio projected of 3.7 in the electric fund, 1.9 in the water fund, and 3.4 in the sewer fund. And all three of these funds do have a 1.25 requirement. And so we are meeting all of those requirements in this budget. As long as we don't have another winter storm Fern. All right, and then what I've kind of heard tonight is that it might be helpful to give like a one-pager like we did last year of this is what we budgeted last year, this is what we're projecting to spend based on this budget, and then this is what we're requesting for next year's budget. Would that be helpful to provide that again? I know you kind of did it yourself a little bit, went back and looked, but I could do a nice one-pager that would show that if that would be helpful.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Okay.
Yeah, it's all kind of here anyway, but
Mm-hmm.
Or are you gonna, I think, Councilman Freeland's question about reserves?
Yes, did I answer your question?
About the fund, I might have been outside.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so we were talking about it. Basically, the way that we project that is that all of our revenues would be dollars coming in, and then all of our expenses would be dollars going out, and so that gives us our net income. So for the electric fund specifically, we would have about a $740,000 net income, but we can't only factor that into the reserve. We also have to add back our depreciation because that is cash that was already spent in a previous year. And so we add that back. and then we have to subtract any capital spending that we expect to spend the next fiscal year.
So is the reserve fund, is that actual set aside money, or is it just paper flow and numbers flow?
Gotcha. That's a really good question. Kind of both. Our reserve fund is basically all operating cash, right? And so it's all one big giant bucket in a bank account, but it's all accounted for in those flow patterns like you talked about. And so each fund has its own reserve associated with it. And so we have a portion of all of those reserves in investments, laddered investments. And so we like to keep free operating cash around, I like to keep around $3.5 million with the entire organization. And then anything above that, we try to keep in those laddered investments so that every month or every other month we have a new investment coming due, and I can decide whether or not that cash is needed now to go into that operating fund, or if we can reinvest it and take it out at a later date.
Thank you. And one other follow-up question.
Sure.
Is that money then accounted for in next year's budget if we don't spend it? Or do we have a specific line item that we put that to if that money is not spent?
Right. No, it all just, so at the end of the fiscal year, it all just factors into whatever's left is going into that operating fund or reserve fund. And so, if we were to budget here, $806,000 is what we're going to add to the reserve in the electric fund, and we actually end up adding $1.2 million instead, there's no adjustment to account for that extra $400,000 that's going into the reserve. It just automatically goes into the reserve. The reserve is that much higher, and then
So
that
it
would
rolls
factor
over
in.
to the reserve.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That would factor into the next year's budget. Yeah. Yeah, because inevitably within these capital projects, there are, certain items that end up costing more or less, or we don't end up, purchasing something that we had planned to in this 5-year capital plan. And so that all kind of comes together to factor into that total reserve fund at the end of the year.
Where is our electric reserve fund and water and sewer fund today? And specifically the electric, what is our minimum reserve fund? Where should it be today?
Yeah, so the electric fund right now is about $5.4 million in its reserve fund, and our minimum requirement for the reserve fund is about $13.9 million. And so this is kind of where we're looking to add back to that reserve every year as best we can to get that closer to that $13 million requirement. The water fund, I could pull it up. It's right around $5 million. And then the sewer fund is somewhere around $6.5 million in its reserve fund.
And that's where you can see, and we take in our 5-year capital plan, we pull from that. It's, you know very well, it's just kind of like the city's general fund. That's what you've got. But we have 3 of them. We have to keep each dollar separated. But we got in the sewer, in the water, we've got a heavy 2.19 for the sewer, 1.9 capital expenses that we have coming up this coming year. It's specific. We've got them planned. It's in that 5-year capital plan. And so it's we pull on that. We use it. We're doing cured in place pipe for the sewer. Those things to help give longevity and make sure that the system functions.
My point in asking, one was so that I knew, and the other point is so you're prepared when you come to council to present that. They're going to want more specific explanation of how that money goes, because there's been so many questions about your rule of your fund, reserve fund. It keeps coming up, and I don't think it's ever really explained well to them, the rest of the council, how that reserve fund plays into the overall, because you have a mandate to have a certain amount of fund. You're short. what's the plan to catch that up? And yes, you have so much, but in normal thinking, bank account type thinking, you have a checking account. When you don't spend it, it goes back into your bank account. You're not able to show that you're using it for the next year and other things. I would be prepared to explain that better.
Yeah, okay.
That's an excellent
Because
question.
it comes up all the time, and I'm not sure you understand it, but it seems to be a question that is hard to get your arms around, especially in front of the council. You know, we have a wide variety of understanding of budget at the council.
Excellent question. We've got a reserve policy that I think really explains much of that, what reacting, what we're supposed to do with it. So thank you. That's a great question.
I think that would be helpful.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Matt.
You say that you have a requirement. Can you explain who requires that amount to be in each fund? Is it for like bond rating, that kind of stuff? Is that why you have to have that specific amount?
Yeah, that's a good question as well. UFS is Utility Financial Solutions. They are one of the most well-regarded industry analysts in this space, and so they put together a list of requirements for each reserve fund, and so there's a weighted allocation and what makes up that minimum requirement. 20% of it comes from your annual operating budget, and so 20% of these annual operating expenses needs to be in your reserve. 90% of your next year's debt service payment, which is made up here in your debt principal, and then your interest costs, which we had on another page. So 20% O&M, 90% of your debt service, 20% of your 5-year capital plan needs to be in your reserve, so that would be your capital spending for the next fiscal year. And then 2.5% of your overall net asset base. And so if we have $40 million of net assets, 2.5% of that would factor into the reserve as well, with the idea that you're going to need to replace that infrastructure at some point, and so you've got to have that funding in the reserve. And so again, in the electric fund, those 4 items make up about $13.9 million of a minimum requirement. And then in the water fund, it's somewhere between $4 and $5 million as a minimum. And then the sewer fund is somewhere around $4 million as a minimum funding requirement. We have looked and analyzed other utilities and what they use in their debt, in their cash reserve requirements as well. Many of them are very similar. Unfortunately, a lot of them are actually even higher than what we are in terms of their requirements. And so I think it was 2019 that UFS did that for us. And so as you can imagine, things have become more and more expensive, and so they've increased some of those recommended requirements. And so at some point in the future, we're probably going to have to look at that and what makes sense. But that's where we're at right now.
What I guess, for me, it's a formula. It's not something we're just grabbing out of the air. There's an absolute formula that's followed. That's where that number comes from. I also look at for the electric, if we were to have a transformer, one of our 100 megawatt transformer go, it would cost us right around $8 million now to get that thing replaced and put back in. And it's not a good thing to wait around for that to get moving. And so having that reserve, that's part of emergency, that's part of storm response, that reserve is a very powerful engine that helps us to be as efficient as we can.
Perfect.
It's
To be
responsible.
fully transparent, though, which I don't believe that they are, it's determined by board policy. The board policy was set in 2019, was the last time it was revisited. It was based on the UFS recommendation, but not a requirement. They're not wrong on what they're telling you about the money needed and the calculations and the projections, but the only requirement on the amount of money in there is set by board policy.
For in cases like emergencies, that kind of stuff, right? I mean, that's.
Yes.
what you're getting at.
Would it be fair to say it's a self-imposed regulation based on industry standard and recommendations from a governing body that you
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think so.
Yep. Yep, no different than the debt service coverage requirement by the bond. They don't want you to, every year, the reason they have that 1.25 requirement is to ensure that 20 years from now, you can still pay them that debt service. If they didn't have that requirement, then, there would be potential that you could have losses every year, and then eventually you're not going to be able to pay that debt service. And so a similar type of idea, we have to ensure that we have those reserves in place to be able to replace infrastructure and then also shoulder emergencies as they come up.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions?
Well, it seemed like I had a lot, but you touched on pretty much all my highlights. It's like you read my mind.
Well, we've got plenty of time before the board meeting where we'll ask you to approve this. And like I mentioned, I will get you a comparison directly between the previous year as well. And then if there's anything else that does come up, feel free to reach out to me. Darren, did you have anything
I
else?
don't.
to
Great
add?
questions. Thank you very, very much. Very, very good.
Any questions from the audience? Specific?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Can I come up? I have a few. Would it be okay if I come up?
Sure.
You go to
Yep.
the microphone.
It might be easier. First, thank you to John and Kelly for being here tonight and taking the time to sit through this budget workshop. It's important that the board members that sit in these roles take their job seriously and are here to make the best decisions possible. So appreciate that. I appreciate the board as a whole on the rate increases for next year, especially the no electric rate increase. On the 3% increase on the water, I understand that that's been kind of a requirement. We did not do that last fiscal year. Do you know what that dollar-wise 3% total would generate on
It's
average?
about, $290,000 in total.
290. All right. Thank you. On the solar contracts that you guys discussed, were those signed, those three, were those signed this year? Or are those upcoming contracts? When we were talking about hedging on the electric and stuff like that.
I think we secured them last year.
They go into effect June 1st of this year, which is the next capacity year. When we actually signed them, because I'm trying to think, because this current fiscal year that we were in, we had one of the solar contracts already. And that's what kind of got us the foot in the door with the other three, because they became available through that same broker. And so when we actually did that, we'd have to go back and look.
We
I
have to
think
check
it was
dates.
Those are board approved contracts, right?
These
The
are,
EEIs.
these are hedges.
Yes.
hedges, yeah, hedge contracts, yep.
The EEIs were approved by the board.
Okay. You talked about Prairie State and the benefits that it has, but as we all know, in 10 years, that thing's coming offline unless something drastically changes. So that 20 megawatts that we enjoy now currently, do you have a long-term plan in place to come up with how we're going to get the additional 20 megawatts we're going to lose in the next 10 years?
We have not. We're looking at, we know that it'll go from, very likely, if things stay the same, it'll go from 20 to 10, and then it'll go all the way to 2043. And we'll have to, as there's other large generations being built, we will absolutely look at getting in and being a part of those as well. I think that Prairie State has truly served us well, but you're going to have to, is nuclear going to take off? Is there going to be other opportunities? But we are absolutely, as a part of MPUA and with our consultants, we have our ear to the ground, and if there's other big projects, we will take advantage of them.
Perfect. Depreciation, Paul, you mentioned that and did a pretty good job of explaining it, and I thank you for that. The question that I had is, I assume that you guys use industry standards. Who calculates that depreciation? Is that standard across the board? How you get to those numbers, or?
Yeah, that's a good point. So not everything is depreciated over the same life. There's different categories for those assets. And so, we use industry standards. Vehicles are 5 to 7 years. IT equipment, things like that, are 5 to 7 years. Copiers And then as you get into your larger assets, I guess, like your water mains I mentioned were 40 years. Substations, like with Indian Mounds, is a 50-year asset. And so, yeah, we use industry standard, and then anything that's kind of foggy that we can't find in industry standards, we'll validate that with the auditors.
I figured as much, but like to Kelly's point where she mentioned that line item, I think it was like 1.2 million or 1.3 million in depreciation, which is a big number.
Right.
So the public is going to ask, or should ask, how do you get to that number?
Yep.
And just wanted to clear that up, that it's not a number that Paul Trinhill just picks out of the air.
Right.
You know.
Yeah, so we have, out of however many assets we have in the system, they would all have those different lives. And so say we had a bucket truck that we bought for $500,000 and it was a 5-year useful life, 100,000 of that would be included in the depreciation expense, along with all of those substations, poles, transformers. Everything is what makes up that total 1.3 or $1.4 million in that expense.
Perfect. One last question, then I'll leave you alone. Can you guys share this draft copy with the council and the public prior to being ratified or approved? Just so that way when you have your next meeting, if that'll give the public time to look through it, to reach out to the board or the administration here.
Yeah, there's no reason not to.
Okay.
Yeah, and you mentioned the auction, because I always try to talk about any potential anticipated changes, but with having limited exposure to that auction, any changes that we have would likely be positive. And so there's not really a whole lot of.
We've talked, I know you and I have talked about it in the past, and the timeline is not good because of when the auction closes versus when the budget's due to the city. There's not a lot of time to get that actual number in there. So it's kind of a guessing game, I think. But it sounds like with the hedging and stuff like that, we're going to be in good shape. So,
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
I have a couple of comments I'd like to make. Yep. Can you hear me? Okay, so along with the budget, I think it would be really helpful. Last year, we had a very stressful budget meeting, and a lot of comments were made about dumbing it down and making it a little easier. I've been thinking about that a lot, and Paul, if you could provide maybe a glossary of terms, I know that they are automatic for you, but there's a lot of people that don't understand a lot of the terms that you use, like debt service or other things like that. So I think that immediately causes the anxiousness to rise when they don't understand. If that could be provided ahead of time for people to consume so they understood what it is you're telling them, I think if they don't read it, it's on them. But if they do take the time to read it, I think that would be very helpful, because these are not, our board is not, or our council is not necessarily made up of financial accountants or people like that. And it would really help bring the tone down if they understood what was being said. And I know you understand, and
I think that's a good point, because even whoever asked what hedging was, you know.
yeah, we're all trying to communicate better and be, more transparent. Transparency is what the end person sees it to be. And if we're using terminology that they don't understand, or if they ask questions, they feel stupid, immediately they don't think it's being transparent, even though you're trying to provide that information. Mm-hmm. The other thing I would say, and Darren, this is to you. I think it's a good idea to stop using terms beat up or anything like that going forward, because it makes it sound like you're a victim to the comments. And really, people are supposed to question what the board's doing. And your function and why you're so important to the whole mix is your ability to explain it to them. If you see that as an attack when people ask questions because you think they're beating you up or taking shots at you, it doesn't really help you provide them with the information. And I know that this year's been very difficult in a lot of different respects. But I think that type of language and that victimhood, of all the people in town, you're not the victim. It's the ratepayers and the people of the town are the victims. You're very fortunate to be running this organization as a general manager. So to use victim terms isn't very fair. Okay?
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
All right. Good info. Anybody else have anything, questions? If not, I recommend we adjourn, even though we don't have a quorum to vote on. By acclamation, I say we adjourn.
Thank you.
Thank you.